You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Back in April 1792, France found itself in hot water when it declared war on the Habsburg monarch, kicking off the War of the First Coalition. By July, things heated up even more when the Duke of Brunswick took charge of an army, mostly made up of Prussians, and marched into France alongside the Austrians. The people of Paris were thrown into panic as this army got closer. The tensions skyrocketed after the Duke dropped the Brunswick Manifesto on July 25. He made it clear that his goal was to put an end to the anarchy in the interior of France, to check the attacks upon the throne and the altar, to re-establish the legal power, to restore to the king the security and the liberty of which he is now deprived, and to place him in a position to exercise once more the legitimate authority which belongs to him. This manifesto basically threatened the French with severe consequences if they tried to fight back against the imperial and Prussian forces or opposed the return of the monarchy. Many saw this manifesto as a breach of France's sovereignty and questioned who really wrote it. While this external threat loomed, revolutionary leaders like Marat and Hebert focused their energy on enemies within France. On August 3rd, Pétion, alongside representatives from 47 local sections, made a bold move by demanding the king's removal from power. On the night of August 9th, 1792, the city of Paris witnessed a pivotal moment in history as a revolt led by the Jacobin faction successfully overturned the existing municipal government, setting the stage for a new revolutionary leadership. By the following morning, the rebels had taken control of the Tuileries Palace, marking a significant shift in power. King Louis XVI, along with his family, was imprisoned, and his authority was officially put on hold by the Legislative Assembly. It didn't take long for the royalist press to be silenced in the immediate aftermath. A temporary governing body was quickly established to tackle the day-to-day running of the city, focusing on everything from policing to managing the economy. However, the real influence now lay with the newly formed revolutionary commune, powered by the sans-culottes and fédérés, which were the driving forces on the streets of Paris and consisted primarily of working-class citizens and armed volunteers from across the country. The city prepared itself for confrontation, arming the 48 sections of Paris with weapons sourced from looted arsenals, ready to replace the National Guard battalions. The legislative body found itself under the Commune's thumb, which didn't waste time in implementing broad changes. These included introducing universal suffrage, arming the civilian population, doing away with noble privileges, and auctioning off the properties of those who had fled the revolution. Pierre-Joseph Cambon, a leading figure of the time, summed up the shift in priorities by emphasizing the need to connect the revolution with the struggles of the impoverished majority, marking a departure from the more politically focused agenda of the Girondists to one that addressed social inequalities head-on. The Commune didn't stop at reforms. It aggressively pursued anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities, setting up surveillance committees across Paris tasked with searches and arrests from August 11th onward. It was these committees, rather than the Commune as a central authority, that primarily carried out the repressive actions of August and September 1792. In an effort to introduce some form of legal proceeding for political suspects, a revolutionary tribunal with the power to declare death sentences without appeal was established on August 17th, a proposal made by Maximilien Robespierre, who notably declined to preside over the tribunal to avoid a conflict of interest. Amid these turbulent times, there were calls for the execution of all detained priests and suspects before the departure of volunteers. Robespierre even suggested building a pyramid in Place Vendôme as a memorial for those who fell on August 10th. By August 19th, priests refusing to pledge loyalty were given an ultimatum to leave France, leading to the closure of all monasteries in Paris, repurposed for other uses such as hospitals. A law enacted on August 15th prohibited all remaining religious orders. The journalist Marat openly called for the lynching of priests and Swiss Guard officers, contributing to a wave of detentions that saw around 500 arrests, including those of non-compliant priests within a 10-day period. In late August, news reached Paris that the Prussian army had entered France and taken Longwy without any resistance. Roland suggested the government should leave Paris, but Robespierre urged the people to stand firm for liberty and equality, even if it meant dying in their defense. The government then decided that priests who had not pledged loyalty had to leave Paris within 8 days and France within 2 weeks. That evening, a massive funeral was held for those who died in the storming of the Tuileries, attended by 350,000 people. By the 28th of August, the city enforced a curfew, shutting its gates and halting all communication with the outside. At Danton, the Justice Minister's request, commissioners went house to house looking for weapons and suspects, which led to over 1,000 new arrests, adding to the already crowded jails. The situation became more tense when the Prussians attacked Verdun on the 29th of August, stirring panic in Paris. The Legislative Assembly, already weakened, struggled with the Commune's rising power. Efforts by some to curb this influence were quickly overturned, hinting at the deepening conflict within the revolution. By the 1st of September, with the prisons overflowing and the citizens called to prepare for defense, fears grew about the safety of a Paris left behind by its defenders. Marat called for a drastic purge, resulting in organized massacres by paid killers and released prisoners, targeting suspected counter-revolutionaries. The British ambassador noted the refusal of some to leave Paris due to fears of a counter-revolution from the crowded prisons. On the 1st of September, opportunities for suspects to escape were briefly provided, just as Verdun's fall opened a direct path for the Prussians to Paris. The Assembly prepared for defense, deciding that a portion of volunteers would stay in Paris, and those not participating or surrendering weapons would be deemed traitors. On the 2nd of September, Danton famously rallied the citizens with a speech urging them to dare for victory, which some, including Madame Roland and historians Hilary Mantel and Louis Mortimer Ternaux, believe incited the September massacres. In the late afternoon around 4 p.m., Madame de Staël, serving as the Swedish ambassadress and living near Champ de Mars on Rue du Bac, found herself caught up in an attempt to leave the bustling city. Her journey was abruptly halted by a crowd, which compelled her to head to the Paris town hall, then under the influence of Robespierre. Contrary to some reports, Charlotte, Maximilian's sister, claims he never actually led the insurrectionary commune. Meanwhile, Louvet de Couvray suggests he effectively governed the Paris Conseil General of the department. Eventually, late that night, she was safely escorted back to her residence by Louis-Pierre Manuel, the procurator. The following day brought a change in her fortunes when Tallien, the Secretary General to the Commune of Paris, brought her a passport and escorted her to the city limits. The first massacre began in the Latin Quarter around 2:30 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. This tragic event involved 24 priests who did not support the revolution and were being transported to the Abbaye prison, close to the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, after an interrogation by Billaud-Varenne at the town hall. The situation escalated when one of their carriages, under escort by the Fédérés, was assaulted following an incident. The attack resulted in the death of 3 men in the street before the group could reach the prison. 18 of the arrested priests were taken inside. The attackers then gruesomely mutilated their bodies in a manner so horrifying that, as a British diplomatic dispatch put it, the details were too shocking to describe. Among the victims was Armand Marc, Count of Montmorin, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Fortunately, Roche-Ambroise Cucuron-Sicard was recognized as a charitable priest and was spared. Late in the afternoon, 115 priests who were being held at the former Carmelites' convent with plans to deport them to French Guiana were tragically killed in the courtyard. This brutal act was carried out with axes, spikes, swords, and pistols by individuals speaking in a distinct patois accent. These individuals forced each priest to take an oath on the civil constitution of the clergy, demanding they swear to be faithful to the nation and to maintain liberty and equality, or die defending it. Some priests sought refuge in the choir and behind the altar, while others attempted to escape by climbing trees, scaling the walls, and fleeing through Rue Cassette. At around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a group of 200 people known as Septembriseurs arrived at Roland's residence on Place Dauphine with intentions to arrest him. However, finding him absent since he was at the ministry, they redirected their effort there. Between 7 and 8 p.m., the group known as the Fédérés returned to the Abbaye prison, situated in what's currently part of Boulevard Saint-Germain, near Passage de la Petite Boucherie. Although the doors were initially shut, they soon resumed the killings after a heated debate with Manuel, the procurator, on the subject of public justice and the inadequacy of judges. Manuel, along with Jean Dussault, were members of a delegation from the city council, sent in a bid to plea for mercy. Sadly, their efforts were met with insult, and they narrowly escaped with their lives. A panel, led by Stanislas Marie Maillard and composed of 12 individuals, conducted interrogations of prisoners, querying why they had been arrested. Telling a lie during questioning spelled doom, as decisions were made on the spot to either release or execute the prisoners. Each detainee faced a series of brief questions, after which they were either set free with cheers of "Live the Nation," or sentenced to death with directions to conduct him to the Abbaye, or simply let him go, leading to their immediate execution by a mob made up of men, women, and children. Despite opposition from the prison staff, who helped many prisoners flee, including notable individuals like Pauline de Tourzel, the violence continued. The Abbaye prison was home to individuals formerly attached to the royal household and survivors from the Swiss Guard. Notables, including Marie-Angélique de Macau and Louise Elisabeth de Croo de Tourzel, alongside others linked to royalty, were brought before these makeshift tribunals. All but the Princess de Lamballe were released. Her fate would become one of the September Massacre's most notorious incidents, released on Manuel's orders by the Commune. As for the Swiss Guards, 135 were killed, 27 transferred, 86 freed, and 22 left with unknown outcomes. Scholar George Long notes that 122 perished and 43 were released. The victims, many of whom were forced to leave behind valuables including money, jewelry, and even a copy of Virgil's esteemed Aeneidus, were found with clothes marked by spade blows and blood. Louvet recounts an incident where 4 armed individuals demanded payment at Roland's house. Below Varennes insisted on Monday morning that the tribunal cease its thievery, promising payment from the Commune. Under Maillard and his team, work recommenced, resulting in the death of 216 men and only 3 women over 3 days. Notably, De Viro and his daughter, who were responsible for a large cache of weapons at the Hôtel des Invalides, survived the ordeal. In the late afternoon, a group visited the Tour Saint-Bernard Tower at the Collège des Bernardins, which was part of a confiscated monastery in the Sansculotte district. This place was used to jail people accused of forging assignats, with most of them imprisoned in the last 3 months. A grim pattern emerged during these events, where condemned prisoners were supposedly transferred, but were instead taken into the courtyard and killed. One person, though, was released after being identified as a thief, not a forger. The perpetrators were rewarded with bread, wine, cheese, and some money for their actions. As the day turned into early evening, mobs breached another Paris prison, the Conciergerie, through an unsecured door. The chaos at the Conciergerie was even more rampant than at the Prison de l'Abbaye, because the prison staff resisted handing over the inmates, forcing the mob to break into the cells directly. The slaughter went on from the late evening into the next morning, with 378 of the 488 prisoners there killed. A particularly harrowing moment involved a woman, Marie Gredeler, a bookseller accused of murder, who was tied to a pole, killed, and then mutilated. Bystanders, including Prudhomme, witnessed these horrific acts, with some even watching from the stairs of the Palace of Justice. Restif de la Bretonne observed bodies stacked on the Pont-au-Change bridge near the Châtelet, eventually being thrown into the river. He documented these events in his work, Les Nuits de Paris, in 1794. By midnight, a shocking turn of events at the Saint-Firmin Seminary saw just 4 men killing all the seminarians detained there, who were arrested in August and averaged 47 years in age. By 2:30 in the morning, it was reported to the Assembly that most of the prisons were empty. The next morning, despite the chaos, the Assembly focused on the city's defense, led by Hérold de Sechelles, making the difficult decision to delay other prisoners' trials due to a temporary shortage of judges. On a day sparked by the rumor that thousands of rifles were hidden inside, Bicêtre, a facility for men and boys that doubled as a prison for beggars and the homeless, saw an unusual flurry of activity. The commander, not taking any chances, arrived with 7 cannons in tow. It was a significant day. François Hanriot, alongside his battalion, according to Cassignac, made their presence felt. They ended up releasing 56 prisoners from its grip. When we look closer at those impacted by the day's events, the youth of the majority is striking. The average age of the 170 victims was around 24 to 25 years. A concerning figure is that 41 victims were young, aged between 12 to 18 years, with a total of 58 being under 20 years old. Attempts by Mayor Pétion to use persuasion and discuss humanity with them, unfortunately, seemed to fall on deaf ears. As the next day broke, attention turned to Salpêtrière, a hospice for women and girls which also contained a prison section. Here, the tragic outcome is more precisely documented. In total, 35 women lost their lives, 23 of whom were minors. The victims had an average age of 45. However, one among them, Marie Bertrand from Dijon, was notably younger at just 17 years old. On a slightly brighter, 52 individuals were released from Salpêtrière, as reported by Cassignac. On a Tuesday afternoon, the violence at the Abbey came to a halt. The police officials, Etienne, Jean Panis, and Sergeant Marceau, took immediate action. They ordered for the blood on the stairs and in the courtyard to be cleaned up, and for straw to be scattered around. They also counted the bodies, and arranged for them to be carted away to prevent any outbreaks of disease. To handle the burial, they struck a deal with the gravedigger from the nearby church of Saint Sulpice in Paris, who was also asked to buy quicklime for the process. By the 5th of September, which was also Election Day, Paris had returned to a state of calm, as noted by the Universal Monitor. However, there were still 80 prisoners held at La Force. The massacres concluded on the 6th of September. The following day, the gates were opened, but anyone wishing to travel to another department needed a passport, making movements out of the area quite restricted. On January 25, 1793, Helen Maria Williams pointed fingers at Robespierre and Danton, labelling Marat merely as their tool. Girondin François Bouzeau brought up names like Camille Desmoulins and Fabre d'Eglantine in connection with their actions. Legal expert and royalist Galard de Montjoie observed a common belief at the time that fédérés from Marseille, Avignon and Brest were behind the violence. Records indicate between 800 to 1,000 of these individuals were stationed in barracks, preparing to move to the heart of the action, with about 300 from Brest and 500 from Marseille taking up space in the Cordeliers convent. Servan had plans to provide them with military training to bolster the army at the front line. The era was rife with rumours of conspiracies within prisons and a strong emphasis on the will and anger of the people, creating a fog of fear and confusion. This narrative made it seem as though the general population was behind these horrific acts, though in reality no more than 200 criminals were involved. While the direct perpetrators were few, there's a suggestion that a broader complicity existed, possibly involving figures in authority. The suggestion was that a small contingent of the town guard could have quelled these disturbances easily. Perry's insights into the aftermath suggest the violence might have had a purging effect, subsequently reducing the number of France's foreign adversaries. This perspective argues that the massacres weren't the result of a spontaneous outbreak of chaos, but arose from understandable frustrations. Authorities like Robert Lindet, Adolphe Thiers, George Long, and Stanley Loomis agree, seeing these acts not as a momentary lapse of reason but as a deliberate strategy. In contrast to views of rampant depravity, the prison massacres are presented as the culmination of both the profound grievances of those wronged on August 10th and the calculated decisions by the Paris Commune, which quietly sanctioned the violence. The victims in these attacks weren't randomly targeted. They were suspected collaborators with foreign powers against France. Mirroring Perry's thoughts, Williams also highlights the people's exasperation, worn thin by delays in justice following the August day's loss of loved ones. Pierre Caron has shown us that in early September, the prisons were almost at a capacity of 2,800 inmates. Between 1,250 and 1,450 of these prisoners were sentenced and executed. According to both Caron and Bluch, a staggering 70% of these executions happened within a mere 20-hour span. Among those who lost their lives were 223 defiant, nonjuring Catholic priests and bishops who stood against the civil constitution of the clergy, 81 Swiss guards, and between 40 to 80 individuals suspected of political affiliations, mostly royalists and aristocrats. This group also included prominent figures such as the Queen's close friend, the Princesse de Lamballe, marking her as the only political casualty in the incident at La Petite Force. Interestingly, between 1,250 and 1,600 of those imprisoned were spared by what were known as the People's Courts. Some were even hailed as patriots by influential revolutionists like Robespierre, Tallien, Desmoulins, and Danton. Meanwhile, a number of prisoners held for debts or alimony were set free by acts of good faith from Louis-Pierre Manuel or by police actions before September 2nd. Over the course of 5 days, 9 prisons faced brutal invasions that concluded on the night of September 6th to 7th. However, 4 prisons were not targeted in these assaults. The surviving 700 Swiss soldiers who were detained in the Palais Bourbon were later released after they agreed to join the volunteers following an oath-taking at the town hall. Initially, the chaos led to random killings, but soon makeshift tribunals were established to sift through the prisoners, attempting to separate those viewed as enemies of the people from the innocent or those not seen as threats to the revolution. Despite these efforts, an estimated 3/4 of those executed included individuals who were not actually counter-revolutionaries or dangers to the state, such as all the galley convicts, counterfeiters, 37 women, among whom were the Princesse de Lamballe and Marie Gredeler, and 66 children. The ages of some priests and women were noted, but very little is known about those listed as prostitutes or mentally ill. On September 3rd, the surveillance groups of the Commune, which now included Marat as a member, issued a call to action. They asked patriots across the provinces to come and protect Paris, and notably advised them to deal with any counter-revolutionaries before they left their own towns. Marat himself strongly encouraged the entire country to take this serious step. Then a letter from Deforgues, who worked with Danton along with Tallien, the secretary of the Paris Commune, was sent out to regional leaders. This letter shared the news that dangerous conspirators held in prisons had been killed by the people. The Girondins later tried to make a big deal out of this letter. There is no solid proof that it really changed anything. The violence did not stop. It kept going until it felt like the countryside was cleared out. Smaller executions happened in cities like Reims, Meaux, and Lyon on the 2nd, 4th, and 9th of September. Particularly shocking was the killing of 44 political prisoners near the Château de Versailles. These prisoners were being moved from the High Court in Orléans back to Paris when they were massacred on September 9th. The following day, Brissot addressed this in his newspaper, Le Patriote Français, making it clear, "No doubt you will be told that it is a vengeance of the people. It will be slander. The people were not involved in this event." Timothy Tackett tells us that for around 48 hours, from August 29th to 31st, Paris was thoroughly searched by the National Guard. They were on the hunt for conspirators and secret weapons. During this time, local section assemblies were already calling for the execution of conspirators before the city's defenders could leave. The Committee of Vigilance was established on August 31st, with Panis and Sergeant Marceau at the helm. Madame de Staël noted that by that date, it was widely known that those sent to the Abbey prison were marked for death. On September 1st, Paris was placed under a state of emergency. The government ordered that the tocsin, a warning bell, be rung the next day, and all able-bodied men should gather at the Champ de Mars. The elections for the 1792 French National Convention began on September 2nd. That day, Robespierre openly accused Brissot and his followers of colluding with the Duke of Brunswick. Additionally, Marat was named as a new member of the Committee of Vigilance, although this did not have the Executive Council's endorsement. Adolphe Thiers provides a grim account of September 2nd. He reported that the warden of the Abbaye prison sent his children away that morning. Prisoners were fed early without knives, hinting at the violence to come. Amid these tense times, the government in Paris was more focused on military preparations than on calming public fears about royalist prisoners potentially overtaking the city once the guards and volunteers left for the war front lines. Madame Roland relates an indifferent response from Danton when asked to protect the prisoners, essentially saying they were on their own. On September 3rd, Roland remarked on wanting to forget the events of the previous day. Meanwhile, many government figures, such as Clavière, Lebrun-Tondu, Monge and Servan, were too involved in national defense to stop or perhaps even predict the ensuing violence. Mayor Pétion de Villeneuve ignored the problem during his visit to Bicêtre. Only a few voices, like Olympe de Gouges and Brissot's newspaper, spoke out against the September massacres. In the first rounds of political sparring within the convention, the Brissotins set their sights on Danton, urging him to step down as minister on the 25th, which eventually happened on October 9th. Danton, however, managed to retain his position as a deputy in the convention. Not stopping there, the Brissotins next targeted Robespierre and Marat. On October 29, 1792, the convention took a moment to reflect on these turbulent events. Jean-Baptiste Louvet de Couvray leveled serious allegations against Robespierre, accusing him of fostering a cult of personality, overseeing the Paris Conseil General and financially supporting the Septembriseurs. Marat faced accusations of antisocial behavior and attempts to establish a dictatorship. Caught off guard, Marat found an unlikely defender in Danton. Robespierre was given a week to craft his response. By November 5th, Robespierre had his say, admitting to Marat's solitary visit since January and arguing that most of those punished were aristocrats, a point contested by many. He conceded that the arrests in late August were as illegal as other revolutionary acts, including the overthrow of the monarchy and the storming of the Bastille. His retort to the convention was piercing. "Citizens, did you want a revolution without revolution?" Robespierre, alongside Danton and Marat, argued that the recent upheavals were the result of a spontaneous uprising, in direct contrast to the Girondins, who saw them as part of a premeditated plot. Following these heated exchanges, Louvet de Couvray, whose speech circulated in published form, found himself barred from the Jacobin Club. The political scene was shaken up by the massacres, first putting the Girondins in a tough spot for seeming too mild, and then the Jacobins for appearing overly ruthless. Nicolas Chambon took over as the new mayor on the 1st of December 1792. By the 4th of February 1793, Robespierre was openly justifying the September massacres as a necessary evil. On the 13th of February, Pierre Gaspard Chaumet got his hands on a list of those who fell victim in the La Force prison. The idea to summon armed volunteers from across the provinces was originally put forward by Servin. Although he found himself arrested during the Terror, he was fortunate enough to be released in February 1795. In 1796, accusations flew against 24 or 39 artisans and small business owners, but only 3 faced condemnation. Among them, a vinegar maker named Damiens was handed a hefty sentence of 20 years behind bars. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.